Everybody at the Galactic Council loved the ambassador from the Mushroom Planet. He was a real fun guy. Sometime around 500 million years ago, the earliest animals crawled out of the sea onto the continents, and yet fungi likely already had arrived on land by then. We believe it might have been the majority of biomass up there for a time, with giant mushroom forests possibly being what early animal life on land first flourished in. Science fiction, and even serious speculation, tend to show us alien life akin to our own. Often so humanoid, it looks like you just slapped some body paint and cosmetic prosthetics on someone. When trying for more alien appearances, we tend to use prior examples drawn from ancient life on Earth. We think fungus has been around for 1.5 billion years, and is neither animal or plant, but has some members with characteristics of both and neither, so it seems reasonable to consider if fungus might be a more common origin of advanced life. Now, until fairly recently, we tended to classify things as plants and animals, or flora and fauna, and then other stuff. And at the moment, we divide other stuff, at least other stuff that's eukaryotic, which is to say it has a nucleus, into a third kingdom of protista. That derives from the Latin for first, and does include a lot of evolutionary chains that predate animals and plants. But we might as well say it translates as miscellaneous, as it was the dumping ground for anything eukaryotic that wasn't a plant or animal, including but not limited to fungus. With that in mind, while we have a special focus on fungus today, we are not just interested in cases like lichen or algae, so we are going to be including some protista that are not considered fungus, though in some cases used to be. In most models these days, fungi are a separate kingdom from protista, and protista often gets split into 2 or more kingdoms itself. We might start by asking what fungus is, and what it has that's better or worse than flora or fauna. And one thing it has in abundance is diversity. With over 1 billion years since it diverged from the animal and plant kingdoms, it's worked its way into just about every ecological niche, including those where animals fear to tread. But let's start by talking about how fungi resembles animals. We should start reviewing their similarities by one major difference, and that's mobility. Fungi generally do not move around. Like plants, they send out seeds, or spores in fungi's case, to grow elsewhere, and yet the simplest of fungi, and probably among the oldest, do have flagella they can move through water with. We also have examples like the zombie fungus that parasitically infects ants and drives them to leave their nest and climb a neighboring plant stem to a certain height while it drains the victim of resources, then drops spores on passing ants below to infect them. Which is an example of mobility that we should not forget, since we often reason we are more or less our brain, and much of our cells in our body are symbiotic ones we share no DNA with, so we could think of a neuron as an immobile cell of a human that controls other human cells and microbes to achieve mobility. Sci-fi is full of sentient fungi or planet mines made of them, and we could imagine a fungal colony using the zombie fungus strategy to infect mobile hosts and grow a brain in them too. Nor is there anything stopping fungus from growing mobile aspects. We also have examples inside the wider category of protists of mobility too, with large examples of both mobile and immobile organisms. We have a lot of polyphyletic groups, multiple species like slime molds that you can think of as an organism, and which we often did assume were one species in earlier days. This can include a fungi among them, and lichen isn't a fungi. No fungi are photosynthetic either, but we could certainly imagine an alien species arising that was a mix and match that way, and to stretch a point, a forest could be viewed as a multi-species organism. We could imagine one having intelligence too, as often shown in many a story, tale, or tradition. Even if the actual intelligence was being carried on just one species of organism, we might still argue the forest is the organism, or superorganism. And again, a human operates as something of a colony organism this way, between non-human bits like mitochondria and various gut bacteria. The line on what an organism is versus a superorganism is rather blurry, but clonal colonies can get immensely huge, to that forest scale, and we see examples of this in fungi, protists, and even plants, like pando, a clonal colony of quaking aspen trees that holds the title of largest organism by mass. We also have the largest fungus in Oregon, which sprawls over several square kilometers. This, along with the general concepts of colony organisms and superorganisms, is of interest to us today. Again, unlike animals, there are no mobile fungi, at least at present. Small extinct versions are plausible. But there are other non-plants and non-animals that are, and ways in which a fungi can move or be blended into those others as a superorganism. And lastly, nothing particularly barring it that I can see. Though given that it would be useful for fungi to be able to get up and move to a new food source, and given how long they've been around, it might be argued it's a hard or impossible evolutionary step. Of course, we're discussing alien fungi, so we really have fungal characteristics since it would presumably have evolved from an entirely separate origin of life on an entirely different planet. Though this could include fungi brought from Earth that are genetically altered by science or environment on some alien planet we settled. Indeed, they might be very good for early settlement and terraforming on other planets. Speaking of fungal characteristics and moving food sources, this is our first point of overlap with animals: heterotrophy. Animals and fungi are both heterotrophs, meaning they obtain their food by consuming organic matter. Fungi absorbs nutrients from their surroundings by secreting enzymes that break down complex molecules into simpler ones, which they then absorb. Animals, on the other hand, ingest and then digest their food internally. A heterotroph basically by definition occupies at least the second level on a food chain, since it is eating some other organism for fuel. This also implies they aren't the original or exclusive life on a planet, as something needs to be supplying food from a different supply, like sunlight, for this not to collapse under cannibalistic entropy. Interestingly, some protists are heterotrophic, as are some parasitic plants like mistletoe. Now, this is fine. There's always a good excuse for dividing and evolving groups of organisms to have some clade turn murderous or cannibalistic, as it gives you another fuel supply while removing a competitor, and time and branching evolution can turn that into a predator-prey cycle and a diverse ecology too. But something does have to be able to add fresh input to the system. We could imagine an organism that ate other organisms and sunlight, or a superorganism like a fungal forest that lived off a photosynthetic microorganism that the fungus ate or that the insects ate, and a zombie fungus brain infected and piloted, or pirated. Generally, an organism that isn't a heterotroph is an autotroph, an organism that converts abiotic sources into energy stored in organic compounds, like the photosynthesis process of converting water and carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen fueled by sunlight. We do have exceptions, as mentioned. Some types of algae are both, called mixotrophs. We also have chemoautotrophs, which interest us for alien life or early Earth life around deep-sea hydrothermal vents especially, as it is a different type of autotroph than normal, which would be a photoautotroph, using light, as opposed to chemical energy in this case, such as oxidizing hydrogen sulfide or ammonia. See our ammonia-based life forms episode for more discussion of that hypothetical alien biology. On the flip side of that, we also have photoheterotrophs, which can use light for energy but cannot fix carbon dioxide, and must obtain carbon in organic form from their environment. Some purple non-sulfur bacteria and green non-sulfur bacteria fall into this category. Bit of a digression, but the keystone to life is having an energy flux and a means to tap it, and we might imagine an organism evolved on a low-gravity moon like Io, full of volcanic energy and sulfur everywhere, which also blows out right into space, as we were discussing in Colonizing Io earlier this week. Fungi can reproduce by spores that can blow a long way, and through harsh environments, so we could imagine evolving on a place like Io as a chemoautotroph and taking root on a neighboring moon, or evolving a photoheterotroph ability and being able to use sunlight without any ready source of liquid water or carbon dioxide gas around to turn into sugar, or surviving in high-pressure lakes of carbon dioxide over some volcano on a planet somewhere between the temperature and atmospheric conditions of Earth and Venus. But the volcanic moon idea is especially interesting in an alien context, as we could get a species able to spread itself between planets as spores, The orcs from Warhammer 40,000 are an example of this, as well as something of a hive mind, as well as being an ancient bioweapon engineered by one ancient civilization, the Old Ones, to fight another alien civilization, the Necrons, who were basically digitally uploaded minds into androids enslaved to organisms, the Catan, that live inside stars. The setting is often brilliant in its utter craziness. The orcs themselves could be thought of as akin to the mushroom of a fungus. If you didn't know, the mushroom is just the sporing mechanism of fungus, which generally lives underground or inside the rotting pile of whatever the mushrooms are growing out of. Our orcs are noted for being able to engage in both consumption of organic matter and photosynthesis, and also have some genetic memory and collective intelligence too, which we might imagine evolving, but also seems like the sorts of this would be handy additions a genetic engineer might start splicing in. We're interested today in what weird fungi-like aliens might evolve on other worlds, but we also don't want to ignore the role fungi and genetically altered fungi might play in terraforming other planets. Indeed, algae and fungi are probably the two most discussed base organisms for settling the moon, since we can grow algae fast in tanks during the 2-week-long daytime on the moon, then take that algae, process it, and leave the rotting leftovers for mushrooms and other fungi to grow out of during the night phase of 2 weeks, and again, both grow very fast. Long dark periods aren't a problem for the fungi, since they are not photosynthetic, but protracted periods without nourishment or fuel is always an issue for organisms and one fungi and animals share a common solution on. Both fungi and animals store energy in the form of glycogen. Plants, in contrast, typically store energy as starch. There are protists that use glycogen, like slime molds, and others that use starch, and we have protists that use other storage like paramylon, laminarin, and Floridian starch. Going back to animal and fungi similarities, both use sexual reproduction, and again both are eukaryotic, which in addition to being a cell with a nucleus, also means a very large cell in general terms, one big enough to have a host of organelles, which might include entirely separate microorganisms that have a hijacked or symbiotic relationship, such as mitochondria, and fungi does indeed have mitochondria. For this same reason, we could imagine a photosynthetic mitochondria equivalent being hijacked into a cell, or some other autotrophic mechanism. Another similarity, especially to crabs and bugs, is that fungi have chitin in their cell walls. Chitin is a strong, flexible polysaccharide. Chitin is also found in the exoskeletons of arthropods, such as insects and crustaceans, which are animals, as well as mollusks like the snail, and in algae for that matter. It's the basis for that hard shell exoskeleton a lot of critters have, and we could well imagine fungal life forms on radiation-soaked worlds, like Jupiter's moon Io. That raises another power supply option, and that's radiotrophic life. This is life that can use ionizing radiation as a food source, and you've probably heard of examples at Chernobyl. These are fungi, and we can imagine an organism growing a thick chitin armor to protect it from radiation, but we can also imagine it adapting to feed off it instead, or both. In the case of radiotrophic organisms from Chernobyl, the key to their ability to utilize radiation lies in the pigment melanin, which they contain in their cell walls. Melanin absorbs radiation and transforms it into chemical energy, which the fungi can then use for growth and development. This process is somewhat analogous to how chlorophyll in plants captures sunlight for photosynthesis, although the mechanisms and end products are different. There are a lot of places in the solar system more radioactive than Chernobyl is, and a lot bigger locations in which evolution and biodiversity could be at play. Inner moons around large planets, like Io is to Jupiter, are very likely to be radiation-soaked hellholes, and Io will get you a lethal dose of radiation in mere hours of exposure. The rings around any gas giant might qualify too, and are likely to be rich in all the chemicals life needs. Life often does surprisingly well in what you and I would think of as a toxic garbage heap, and fungi in particular. They are a pretty neat phenomena, but radiotrophic fungi also represent a fascinating adaptation to extreme environments and expand our understanding of the potential for life in harsh conditions, including possibly on other planets or moons with high radiation levels. They might occur naturally and spread among the icy moonlets of a planetary ring, or from the volcanoes and cryovolcanoes of moons and dwarf planets. And given how big that total ecology would be at that point, bordering on being a natural Kardashev 2 civilization, one using all or a large part of the light of its sun, it becomes very plausible that the sheer size of that overall ecosystem might drive enough evolution to produce both intelligent organisms or naturally adapted interstellar organisms. Some fungi evolves the ability to find a naturally high concentration of some radioactive element, or even help digest and condense it, and now you have some big spore with a dense capsule of uranium in it, or even its outer shell that it's using as a long-term power supply to drift around far beyond where the sun shines. Indeed, given that fungi makes a career out of living in places where the sun don't shine, we could easily imagine even non-radiotrophic versions of it sending out spores that sail away on the solar wind out to deep space, where 1 in a trillion land on some small rock or ice ball and grow there, until eventually your whole Kuiper belt or even Oort cloud might be settled with fungus, and potentially then spread throughout the galaxy. This could occur naturally, and I could also see it being an early terraforming mechanism for those who wanted to engineer a space-borne fungus. It's not likely to be an existential threat. It lands in solar systems and starts the biology going. This could be a lone species, but lichen is probably a better example, being a pairing of fungus with photosynthetic organisms, algae or cyanobacterium. One could imagine some equivalent to coral reefs being built in space as a mix of organisms that way, and potentially feeding animal life, like space whales, or fungus equivalents to it. But you could probably make some seed or spore pod that could contain a decent variety of organisms. Various fungi and algae and bacteria, maybe a hollow biont. With the right blends, you could have an ecosystem that are able to run itself on sunlight, ionizing radiation, chemical processes, regular old sugar, or even natural fission, made somewhat unnatural by organisms that ate bigger rocks and digested the uranium to be put together as the equivalent of fuel rods. If you had asked me about such things 20 years ago when I was in grad school, studying biophysics, or maybe even 10 years ago when I started the show, I would have broken out laughing. But we've found a lot more weird life forms since then, and I've learned more of them. I never underestimate how weird nature can get, let alone what a determined civilization might be able to spawn up in a petri dish in some genetic laboratory. If this hypothetical collection of organisms in their protective shell was able to survive interstellar space, or survive atmospheric entry, they could start life there. Indeed, given that we have seeds that spread by forest fire, they maybe could even burn up on atmospheric entry but leave some smaller pods able to descend to the ground or sea below, or organisms able to float in that air. You then come several thousand years later with a traditional colony spaceship and land among the algae mats and mushroom forests of some previously dead rock. Or you might go the full-on Orcs of Warhammer 40,000 route, and the fungus eventually gets developed enough to start spitting out its animal mushroom equivalents, or its hive mind on its algae mats. But that could be engineered too. We don't think it takes too much space to store a human mind. We tend to estimate it in the tens of terabytes, a bigger commercially available hard drive as of the time of this writing. And if you ever mastered storing data on DNA, then considering how much smaller it is than a hard drive, byte for byte, not only might such a pod carry a lot of DNA on it, including more complex hybrid animals it could grow later on as the colony grew, but it might be able to have memories on there. That might be an interesting way to explore the galaxy, waking up on some mushroom stock as a fungus person, complete with your earthly skills and memories. And fungus in a brain roll isn't that hard an adaptation. Non-mobile organisms don't really benefit from brains, so we wouldn't expect it to evolve in our fungus, but the basic hardware is in place in the form of signal transduction pathway. Many of the biochemical pathways that fungi use to sense and respond to their environment are similar to those in animals. This includes pathways for sensing nutrients, stress, and hormones. Moving this towards some basic brain equivalent wouldn't seem any harder than it was in animals, if the brain itself served any value to justify itself to evolutionary processes. But someone seeking to engineer mobile fungi should have what they need to work with already to give it a brain equivalent. We see examples of alien fungus in a fair amount of science fiction, and mushroom men less often, with examples like the orcs or the folks that live in the sewers the Mario Brothers travel in Nintendo, or various fungal or algae forest mines or planet mines, like in Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, one of the best video games ever made. But at the same time, it is an undertapped area of fiction, and one that might have some scientific realism to it. So I thought we'd close out with the peculiar planet Mycoria and the people that evolved there a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Unlike Earth, Mycoria was covered in vast, dense forests of gigantic mushrooms, towering spires of bioluminescent fungi, and sprawling networks of mycelium that connected everything beneath the surface. Many hundreds of millions of years ago, the planet's unique conditions fostered the evolution of fungi that began to exhibit extraordinary traits. These fungi and lichen were not only enormous in size, but also started to develop complex structures that resembled neural networks, and in many cases even looked a lot like a brain. The mycelial networks grew denser and more intricate, allowing these alien fungi to process information and respond to their environment in increasingly sophisticated ways. As eons passed, the fungi of Mycoria achieved a level of sentience. They could communicate through a series of biochemical signals, much like a brain's synapses, transmitting thoughts and ideas across the planet-wide mycelial network. This network, which they called the mind root, became the collective consciousness of the fungal inhabitants, but rather than forming a traditional hive mind, the mind root mostly grew its wider brain in stationary tree-like giant mushrooms, while the mobile, animal-like organisms that grew and only became mobile at maturity continued to grow larger brains that were only strongly connected to the wider mind root during their infancy, and connected once mobile by chemical signals sent by spores drifting through the air, a very low bandwidth yet ever-present connection to each other and the wider world of Mycoria. Due to this connection, the sentient fungi developed a society based on mutual cooperation and shared knowledge. While not absent aggression and hostility, theirs was generally a more peaceful civilization. They believed that when they died, their body and mind returned to the mind root, or a greater connection to it. They learned to manipulate their environment, using their mycelial tendrils to construct towering fungal cities that glowed with a soft, ethereal light. These cities were living organisms themselves, constantly growing and adapting to the needs of the fungal inhabitants, and indeed like them were partially extensions of the mind root, and partially an independent organism, a sort of genus loci for the smaller city ecosystem. The mind root, as the central intelligence of Mycoria, loosely guided the Mycorians in many aspects of life, eventually taking down a technological pathway, and one that included organic computers and even more mechanical and electronic technologies, such as lenses, electricity, and rockets. This event marked a turning point for the fungal society. Realizing that they had the capability to protect and preserve not only their own planet, but potentially others as well, the fungi began to explore beyond Mycoria. To their surprise, they found several of the planets and moons in their star system already had basic fungal life there, which they hypothesized might have been spread by asteroid impacts in primeval times. With this example in mind, they extended their mycelial networks into space, sending out spores that could travel vast distances and colonize new worlds. But no one wished to leave the mind root behind, and it took far too long to grow lesser siblings to it on those nearest worlds, where techno-organic augmentations allowed them to stay linked into the mind root at light speed. So they contented themselves to simply send out spores that were created in their labs to survive the harsh conditions and timelines of spreading to new solar systems, and from there to plant themselves on asteroids, grow again and send out more. One day the whole galaxy would be full of life descended from Mycoria, and on some of these intelligence might one day develop, but the Mycorians were content to stay on their world with their mind root, and wait patiently to see what seeds took root, and what new people might arise as distant cousins on distant worlds, a long time ahead, and maybe even in other galaxies far, far away. Whenever doing these Aliens episodes, I always have the strangest questions pop to mind. One I thought of recently was whether or not alien mushroom people would have beards, or any other aliens for that matter. But whether or not aliens need to shave, a lot of us do. And if you're tired of the gimmicks and high cost of disposable razors, you should try out Henson Shaving. Henson's is into precision and data, not gimmicks. They do real research into improving them, and so if you're looking for a cutting-edge razor, Henson Shaving is the way to go. They've manufactured pieces for Mars rover and the space station, and they make a top-notch aluminum safety razor that will last a lifetime. With a built-in 30-degree angle optimal for shaving and a tight fit for the razor so it doesn't bend and flex too much, you get a much smoother shave and less skin irritation. I've been using mine for months now and noticed the difference, way fewer nicks and red bumps, from a better razor and a better method. Stop wasting money on disposables and elaborate 5-blade cartridges. One 10-cent blade is all you need if it's held in place by precision engineering like Henson Shaving offers. Try it now at hensonshaving.com/Isaac Arthur, and Henson Shaving will throw in a free 100-pack of razor blades if you use promo code Isaac Arthur at checkout. Get a better shave at a fraction of the cost. Go to hensonshaving.com/Isaac Arthur. Next week we'll be looking at ocean habitats, artificial islands, and submarine cities here on Earth and on alien planets. But if you want to continue thinking on alien behavior, I recently used an example of alien ocean habitats, a bear-like race of Earth signs swimming around a mini-island archipelago planet, to discuss how alien social grouping might work out. If you're interested in seeing that, it's over on Brain in a Vat, an awesome philosophy-focused channel that doesn't shy away from futurism topics. I really enjoyed my chat over there, and they've got a lot of other great thinkers covering deep topics, like David Benatar discussing the meaning of life. So pop on over for our discussion of alien societies and give them a like and subscribe. Speaking of the meaning of life, next Thursday, October 24th, we'll be exploring potential pathways for life and purpose that people of the distant future might pursue, including post-human options like having their brain melded into a forest, or mountain, or even a whole planet. Then in 2 weeks we'll go the other direction, into the very distant past, to look at the dark stars that formed in our universe near the beginning of time. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. SFIA's episodes also come out early and ad-free on our streaming service Nebula, like this month's exclusive episode, Caretaker AI and Genus Loci, at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.